Between 2020 and 2024, Touched Music released a number of different mix albums under the FSOLDigital Presents banner. These came out with 1 or 2 a year. In 2025, however, things went crazy with the FSOLDigital and Touched co-releases, with a large number coming out, and we'll be looking at all of those in this week's episode of Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. FSOLDigital presents Trip Maps 3, release date 11th July 2025. I love the way these things grow. The first Trip Maps was a companion album to My Maps 4, a simple CD in a cart sleeve with no tracklist. The second was a companion album to My Maps 5, a full album with tracklist and indexes and a digital release, and released it in a CD digipack. The third Trip Maps is a standalone album in its own regard. Much of what was said about the second volume can be said here. Mostly FSOL alias originals, a few older bits given a new mix, another mix of one of my tracks, some other remixes, a few other bits and bobs, all done on his style that's halfway between FSOL and Amorphous. The album's gapless. The art picks up the style of the previous, with radio mast and hill instead of guitars and woodland. Ian McPherson is thanked again, and listeners are warned tracks may contain noise, hiss, crackles. Gage is responsible for mixing, remixing and rebuilding, with FSOL producing. 5 logos are on the disc and are joined by the Touched logo on the back of the CD. 2 other major differences between this album and the previous ones: it features the 2 big names, FSOL and Amorphous, and it also came out on a 12-inch. This final edition is technically an EP with a 12-tot catalogue number and the same kind of sleeve as the usual Passion Music EPs. Featuring a small selection of FSOL originals without any of the remixes, it's a fun bonus release, although oddly one for collectors and very casual fans only, with your average fan probably best served by the full CD or download tracklist. The 12-inch is just an FSOLDigital release, while the CD is a joint release with Touched Music. The download edition features a bonus track not on either physical format. A video with an excerpt of the Enofa track was used to preview the release on Facebook and YouTube. Lies Not War, Horse and Me. I love this title. Actually, I love this track. A confirmed alias, the elements of this were all recorded during Amorphous sessions at various points and combined here into a new piece. Gorgeous, moody acoustic guitar loop sits at the core with jazzy drums and fuzzy electric guitar improv and woodwind instruments over the top. A darkly rustic vibe that really reminds me of early FSOLDigital side projects like The Woodlands of Old and Salient Moons. The only problem for me is that this is my favourite track on the album, leaving everything else to play catch up. I'd love to hear more music like this come out of FSOLDigital. Turbulent Space, Feeling Something or Lapsing. The Turbulent Space track on Trip Maps 2 was pretty much guaranteed to be an alias track, but the fact that this title comes from the 2009 live show visuals and their endless lists of possible meanings for FSOL confirms it. In pretty similar territory to that first track, in a progressive breaks kind of way, once again I wonder whether Will White had anything to do with it. Again, slightly Propellerheadsy style. More action film soundtrack vibes. This one's a bit darker and more dramatic, not a car chase, but maybe something scoring espionage, the character sneaking out of a high security compound. Amusing chipmunk style high pitched voices close the track. Amorphous Androgynous, We Persuade Ourselves We Are Immortal, Night Shift. A previously unheard mix of Immortal is the first Amorphous track in 5 years. This is pretty different to any previously heard version, if only because it's pretty spacious and stripped back. dubby bass and drums sway in and out through a phaser with harp and synths appearing over the top. It's a lovely laid-back reprise of the original piece, clearly the same track but totally very different to the melodrama of the original. A sample from a version of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland are a lovely close. Jack Without You. Brian's Uncle Jack once again recorded by his father in 1973 and giving a subtle atmospheric makeover with a little reverb. As with the previous track Silver Ripples, this is a bloody gorgeous folky song. Petition for FSOLDigital to just release the whole session. The man talks about voices in your head at the end.
Why have to go? Why leave without me? You know I love you so. Shooting stone will be over. The clouds in my mind will be
Enofa, Big Meat River. This time a bit of an exclusive. The original mix of Big Meat River wasn't released until many months after this remix. Once again, this is basically a co-production job by Brian, given some polish, some new synths and piano, new effects, and chopped down considerably. There's a nearly 7-minute full version in existence, maybe it'll get heard one day. This is one of the silliest tracks I've made, a sort of trip-hop-ish piece with overdriven 60s style guitar and a very daft synth melody that heads into sinister cartel-esque territory in the middle and ends with soaring mellotron strings. Zen Woolly Icicle, another Lisa Bartlett track. In contrast with the gentle ambience of her Trip Maps 2-piece TU, this is very up-tempo with soft ethnic sounding percussion and flute. Samples of singing voices and birdsong are added with some familiar sounds, I'm thinking Desio reconstruction, lending a very 90s FSOL atmosphere. Ends with some Wordsworth and synth noises. Koch, Ragaloop, or Ragalug, depending on whether you look at the CD or Bandcamp page. This one's the definite remix, Yage having a go at a piece by the Australian IDM artist. I can't find a reference to the original anywhere online, though, suggesting the title is exclusive to the remix. It's a very krautrocky feel to it, mid-tempo metallic beat, droning electric guitar improvisation, groovy bass. Yage Chop Strat 4. Choppy sounds created by muting the strings of a Fender Stratocaster. The fourth version would be my guess behind the title, which would make sense given that this piece features the choppy sounds from Vast Landscape, albeit sped up. This comes in after a minute of backwards synths and possibly piano and sax improv. Whereas Vast Landscape is a pretty ominous sounding piece, Chopstrap 4 is quietly beautiful and uplifting. Ashtray Backroom Jam. Nothing to do with the Magic Ashtray Band, this is very much what the title suggests, probably. A bluesy jam, some wah-wah guitar improv, some funky synths, live drums. Is this a backroom jam by somebody? Is this Brian overdubbing himself, playing it back through a speaker and recording that to create the sound of a lo-fi recording of a jam? Who knows, I'd say the odds are probably 50-50. It's good fun though. Ends pretty abruptly. The future sound of London, there is nothing. Okay, so an actual FSOL track on here was a bit of a surprise. The very loose sounding live drums have a jazz fusion vibe, definitely echoes of early 70s Miles Davis here, over which are synth sequences and drones. The whole thing breaks down to synth bleeps, and then it all reappears with a fuzzy, wobbly synth melody on top. Honestly, this doesn't really sound like any other FSOL track, definitely not one from the 2020s, but it would absolutely work on a lot of FSOL records. I can really imagine it emerging from the Merc on the late 94 VPRO transmission. Fitting in with that show's vibe is a very muffled lo-fi recording of a band jamming and some dark plucked piano strings as a closing environment. Hedgebirds, are you there? I wonder what species these birds are. Reed buntings would be my guess. Anyway, the Are They Fighting Us screaming sample appears over a slow percussion loop and some backwards guitars. Quite tense and dark. Quiet piano appears for a moment and then it all fades out to footsteps and brooding acoustic guitar. Odd little piece. New York Mules, Loose Tongue. It's on the 12-inch, so it's almost certainly an FSOLDigital alias. This features some very lo-fi drums, harmonica, and a lot of amusing samples over the top. Weird screeching, a ship's foghorn, what are probably glitchy noises from the synthy, gloomy violin, groovy Hammond organ samples, grimly atmospheric and whimsical at the same time. I'm not sure if this is a metaphorical loose tongue or a horrible injury, but the mood of the piece suggests both. Paris Workforce Trio, Jump Ship. Back into jazzy territory again with brush drums, wah-wah guitar, possible double bass, kind of solos by clean guitar and trombone, although the production is very clearly lute based. My guess would be this is another Alias track. Smoke-Filled. Another vinyl track, so we can see another in-house production. Lots of blippy synth harps, organ, gorgeous electric piano. It's been suggested it's a Daniel Pemberton collaboration, which wouldn't surprise me given the playing. Jazzy again, but also quite ambient and lush. Closes with quiet gusts of wind and a wolf howl. Beautiful track. Park. Can't go on. Paolo Longue, the long-time unidentified chap in the three-man band photos used throughout the Isness booklet, the guitarist on Manners of Virus and Shoes and Wooden Ships, has appeared with Park tracks on a couple of radio mixes, but for an album recorded with FSOL has been long rumoured to appear on FSOLDigital, which never actually happened. This is the first standalone track to be released, and it's a groovy instrumental, layers of fuzzy guitar improv, folky acoustics, wandering electric bass, scuzzy synths, and a fairly simple drum loop. A minute-long environment ends the track with quiet, wailed vocals, synthy bubbles, and a reverse guitar and bass. One wonders whether there's an element of another Park track. Snake Oil Token. This wouldn't be at the top of the obvious choices for an Alias track, but apparently it is. It begins with a pretty lo-fi sounding piece in 6/8 time for organ and drums, something that sounds like it would have come from about 1961, but then in come much cleaner electric guitar, synthy sweeps, what might be a flute or sax melody. I'm guessing it's a loop of an old track sampled and used as the basis for a new piece. That old-timey bit has such a sentimental sound to it that it's almost disorientingly strange in an FSOL context, especially when some atmospheric wordless voices join. Surprises like this are always welcome, although part of me wishes a track like this turned up randomly on a mainline album, just taking everyone by surprise. Maybe that's the sort of daft thing only I'd do. Still going in. Slow, spacious, trip-hopish drums, horror film, hammer organ, and hugely atmospheric synth pads make this the darkest Trip Maps piece to date with a really fun, spooky vibe to it. Bombe Atomique, Way Upstream, a track by Brian and Simon Wells from early 1998 to end. Recorded in the final days of Earthbeat, this is a rare example of a Wilderness Years piece. You can definitely hear it's created to fit in with the more psychedelic sound FSOL was adopting at the time, with super fast drums, a hypnotic joint bass and fuzz guitar riff and improvisation, and a strong spy film vibe once again. It's quite fun, I really like the bell samples and the squelchy synths. But if I'm being honest, I really don't need 5 minutes of this. Bizarrely, the closing minute and a half environment is little more than a quiet, weird drone fading away to silence. Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here, asks Jack Nicholson in The Shining, and we're done. Turbulent Space, Fat 2 Dog if I'm being pedantic. If any Trip Maps project had an album up its sleeve, I'd put money on Turbulent Space. Not only has it provided 3 tracks, but all 3 have the same particular sound that is quite distinct from the rest of the series, with a funky big beat approach and soundtrack vibe. This is much slower than the other 2 tracks, but has the same punchy, polished production, big drums and wah-wah guitars, fuzz bass and glossy, funky synths. Oh, and a closing minute of shimmery guitar, synth delays and flute melodies, because, you know, weirdness. Touched Music FSOL Night 11, 11th July 2025. An FSOL release doesn't happen on Touched without a launch night, and Trip Maps 3 was no different. The opening 30-minute warm-up was, at the time, to be called Rapid Eye Movements, although later released on Unrealities as The Subconscious Mind Communicates. Brian recommended to me that the mix might be worth recording, and described it later as thus: I thought album playback was too easy, so designed a journey that incorporates some old Trip Maps tracks remixed plus some exclusives. So we're back to exclusive mixes again. It actually does contain the bulk of Trip Maps 3, all but 3 tracks, and features 4 pieces not on the album, so it worked well as a preview of the release but also gave a unique listening experience. Opens with some new synths before heading straight into Turbulent Spaces Feeling Something or Lapsing, the reworking of We Persuade Ourselves We're Immortal, and the Enofa track. After this we get a new reworking of Hands of Time by Pleasure Fields, less emphasis on vocals with some different drums in places, flute improv and a more stop-start structure, even stripped right back to synth arpeggios at one point. It ends with a sample from an old documentary talking about the instruments used in a piece of experimental music, and then the closing environment from Fat Dog. Afterwards comes Icicle and Ragaloog, followed by the dodgy headphone jack sample from Trip Maps 2. The first unknown track is a mid-tempo piece for light percussion and spacey guitar improvisation. Then back to Trip Maps 3 land with Jump Ship, Smoke Filled and Fat Dog. The next exclusive is quite Americana in sound, with some bluesy guitar and live sounding drums, flute melodies in the second half, but then a surprising shift into Eastern sounding string loops. The recording of an old TV or radio show about Christmas visit to a hospital is a very odd little moment, and is followed by an electronic raga-ish track, some kind of percussion loop with a tabla vibe, field recordings, synth melodies. It's cut off after a minute for Way Upstream, Are You There, There Is Nothing, Can't Go On's outro, Horse and Me, Chops Trap 5, Backroom Jam and Token. Half an hour after the end of the stream, somebody popped up on the FSOL board to say a bonus mix was playing. This is the only post this member has, so I assume this was just trolling, but who knows. The bonus mix did play, I doubt many people heard it. FSOLDigital presents Mind Maps 6, release date 22nd of August 2025. Another year, another Mind Maps. I mean, it's a given at this point, isn't it? Pretty sure there's a Mind Maps 7 in the works. We got a fairly early announcement this time, Touched mentioning it on the 10th of August, with the usual promo going up on the 17th. I'm running out of things to say about these releases, you know the deal by now, track list and index tracks again. Artwork updated again to show satellite dishes on the cover and throughout the sleeve, keeping the style refreshed, also matched on the t-shirts that came alongside it. Also included on the digipack is the phrase Transmission 6 Signal Intercept Yage. Musically, it's a slight return to the feel of earlier Mind Maps with a more playful mood and more in the way of IDM to the rhythms, plus a return to answer phone messages. There are fewer tracks than normal this time, and FSOL originals are at their sparsest to date with just 1 Humanoid track and 1 Future Sound of London track. Oh yeah, and it came out on vinyl too. And unlike Trip Maps 3, this isn't just an EP of selected tracks put out by FSOLDigital, but a full album with a full sleeve released by both FSOL and Touched. The track lists, however, are different. The CD has 3 exclusive tracks, 4 if you include the hidden track, while the LP has 2. The running orders are totally different. Yeah, I don't like this. I actually hate the whole exclusive tracks per format thing. I like an album to have a definitive track list, and I also don't think it's great to ask people to buy more than 1 copy of an album to get all of the music, so yeah. Grumble over. Every track is a Yage remix this time, without the blend of mixes and remixes. The vinyl edition includes EBX, once again in the list of labels, and I still don't know what it is. I think it's just Brian trolling at this point. There's some utterly fantastic tracks on Mind Maps 6, but overall it's left far less of an impression on me than, I don't know, maybe any of the other mind maps. I'm struggling to work out why though. UFO Melody 22 Yage remix. We get an opening environment this time, some familiar samples, field recordings and synth sounds. And then boom, punchy IDM beats, twinkly synths into typical mind maps territory. This is quite a melancholic piece, some very emotive melodies, and a strong way to start the CD version. And then an answer phone message, just in case you thought they'd gone for good after Volume 5. Case Idler Yage remix. This one takes a while to get going, opening with some atmospheric, quiet synth work for 90 seconds before a very slow, staggered broken beat comes in with some sharp slices of sound and glitches occasionally laid over. Eventually a deep, rumbling bass line appears and the piece finally comes together. It's unusually sparse for a mind maps track, and this sense of space is very welcome. Beat Manifesto Deformer Yage remix. Crossfading in from the previous track, this is the first time these two artists have appeared together since FSOL sampled the Radio Babylon bassline for Papua New Guinea back in 1991. This CD exclusive is one of the fastest mind maps tracks with a pacey breakbeat setting tempo, some amelodic synth sequences wildly flailing around the mix, and chopped up pads. It's a pretty hectic piece and totally reverses the mood of the disc after the previous track. Nick from XL has a remix job for FSOL in the closing voicemail. The future sound of London, Home Glow. The sole FSOL original here, and it's a real stunner. Breathy female vocals, shrill, almost R&B inspired beats, glassy synth pads, spiky twinkly arpeggios. It's like a very, very abstract version of alt pop or alternative R&B, or I don't know, whatever these things get called. It has a dreamlike ethereal atmosphere, it's filled with space, sounds not a jot like any other FSOL or Alias track, and something about it makes it feel a vocal takeaway from the most commercial thing FSOL has ever done, and I really, really love it. My favourite track for some years, and I really hope there's more like this on the way. Yunks 0115140524 Yage remix. I wonder who's at the end of that for. Oh wait, no, that doesn't have enough numbers for a UK phone number. The staccato piano that plays at the core of this track is heavily reminiscent of Glass. This is apparently why the sax samples in the middle were added, as a nod to the Dead Cities track. Uplifting, bouncy, quietly emotive, complex yet restrained, it's a very pretty track. An answer phone message speeds up hilariously for the end. Biophonics Disentangled Fragments Yage remix. A new sound here, dub techno. Thin shards of sound act as percussion, voice samples come and go, chords are sprinkled and creased over the top. The whole thing is incredibly spacious and minimal. I really like this. I have a huge fondness for very roomy, sparse techno, and this is pleasingly not caked in the usual dub techno reverb and delay, just subtle hints of it. One of my favourites on the album. AIMB Bella Luna Acid Yage remix. The first of 3 remixes for Touched music owner Martin Bolton on My Map 6, here with this project with Anders Iller. This is melodic acid IDM, some very toy-tronic beats and arpeggios, but with 303 adding bite. Some glitchy and time-stretched answer phone chat at the end. Sundial Aeon Cold Matter Kingdom Yage remix. Sundial Aeon's contribution to the album is another CD exclusive and one of the slower pieces. As always with this track, it's a darker one for the first time on the album, with chunky hip-hop style beats, spooky flute, distorted synths, thin electronic noise and some psy acid near the end. Typically excellent. Robert Liner, Days Like Others, Yage remix. The third CD exclusive is from Robert Liner, who appeared under his own name and as the source on several Kiss FM mixes. This is a pretty laid-back, down-tempo techno piece, gentle beats, plenty of twinkly synths, light plucked bass and some atmospheric pads near the end. It's fine, not one that sticks with me really, but does the job. Hyojin Autumn Twilight Yage remix. In the relatively uncommon, in electronic music at least, 6/8 time, this alters the tempo and groove of the album. Hyojin's usual dramatic, hugely emotive melodies are here in full force, maybe the most beautiful piece that's been remixed by Yage to date. It's especially effective in the final 90 seconds when the drums cut out to leave the devastating synths to play on their own. As a result, an answer phone invitation to meet up at a Cabaret Voltaire gig feels strangely poignant. Humanoid C3. The second and final of the album's 2 original pieces, this is once again Humanoid in best of both worlds territory, acid at the forefront but clanking beats of the early 90s Aphex and Beaumont Hannon variety. Airy synth pads lighten the mood from its somewhat sinister opening. Tlan, Commando, Yage remix. With a beat that has no plans of behaving like a beat, this is one of the odder remixes on the album. A lot of the synth work sounds FM, which adds to the strangely alien feel of the piece, an oddly writhing track that feels like a digital organism. Some enjoyably sharp arpeggios appear in the second half before the piece fades away into an answerphone invite to a club night at somewhere in Mayfair. Who knew they travelled in such upmarket circles back in the day? Fluffy Inside, Magnetic Mr. Apple's Yage remix. I wholeheartedly approve of both artist name and song title here. The first frantic beat reminds me of the quiet rhythm that ticks away in the outro of Spineless Jelly, although it's quickly joined by punchier drums, and then we're into humanoid-esque acid madness with some extremely squelchy 303 work. The piece ricochets away into filtered delays and a long, echoing outro drone. Hidden track. The CD has a hidden track, an alternate version of the Autumn Twilight remix from earlier. This takes the smooth sound of Hyojin's original into something more staccato with plucked blippy synth arpeggios as the main focus over the drums here. The layers of synths grows throughout, ending up with something that feels like an electronic gamelan piece in places, with synthetic metallic plucks and strings. A gorgeous piano adds an especially melancholic touch to the outro. Not quite as affecting as the earlier remix, this one is more strikingly original. Minilan 444 Yage remix. Never take anything for granted. For example, when listening to the two vinyl exclusive tracks on My Map 6, both Minilan remixes, one shouldn't necessarily expect the usual melodic and playful electronica sound usually associated with a name. Unlike the Ortega piece that shares the name, 444, here, in its Yage remix, it's harsh, percussive, heavy and intimidating. Layers of drums, panned all over the stereo field in an incredibly disorientating manner, sit behind harsh synth notes that descend into pits of darkness. Enjoyably odd. Minilan, His Hell, Yage remix. The second Minilan remix is, at least in more familiar territory, waves of modulated synth sequencing coming and going over crisp beats. The rhythms have a nice 808y electro kind of vibe, and the synths morph into more dramatic plinks at times, keeping the listener on their toes. An intriguing piece that walks the line between light and darkness. Touched Music FSOL Night 12, the 22nd of August 2025. My Map 6 was of course launched with another Mixler night, opening with a 1996 transmission intro and some 1994 transmission samples. The night then launched into the now expected 30-minute warm-up, this time cloud forms, and I'll be looking at all of these later in the video. Then, much like with the Trip Maps 3 launch, things went into an exclusive mix rather than a simple playthrough of the album. And also like that show, the mix is pretty similar to the album. Running to 90 minutes, features the bulk of my Map 6, everything from the CD version except the hidden Hyojin remix, and also missing the 2 Miniland remixes from the LP. It also features tracks from earlier mind maps, Carsten Flum's Borg Acid Humanoid remix, an edit of Dron's Graviton Yage remix, an edit of a Creationator's Soren Yage remix under the name I Mustn't Rush Yage remix, Hyogen's Rectangular Triangles Yage remix, and Riz Maslin's The Lake of the Woods Yage remix, plus a couple of alternate versions. Inkipak's Open Door Yage remix is probably the most obvious of the alternate mixes, with entirely different rhythms, starting out stark and spacious, moving into shuffling and fast, and whole new layers of bleepy melodies and pads over the top. Definitely my preferred of the two. Sooty and Gorge's rather lazy Yage remix appears here in a slightly more spacious mix, with what sounds like old 70s organ rhythm in the mix. Lots and lots of antiphone messages between, none that stood out as exclusive to this mix as far as I can tell. At 90 minutes, the mix didn't leave much room for a bonus mix, but it did end with a very big and exciting tease for possible future release, 2026's Record Store Day release, something we'll never hear again. Who knows? Anyway, it was a re-recording of Vit Drowning. Reasonably faithful to the Dead City's original, but opening with the drums, and the beats given a punchier, dubbier vibe, and slightly truncated in structure. It was a wonderful moment and a great way to end the night. FSOLDigital presents Mind Maps Mix, release date 22nd of August 2025. A promo CD of the night's mix cut into the constituent tracks. Copies were sent out to, well, I don't know who exactly Martin chose and how he made the decision, but it made its way to various people. I've got one of them. What with CDs running to 80 minutes and all, the final 3 tracks from the mix are missing, meaning that the Vit Drowning re-recording remains officially unreleased. Typical. The CD version was made for general sale upon the release of Mind Trip later in the year. The Future Sound of London, a Controlled Vista expanded, release date 24th of October 2025. The third Touched Music release of the year came in the form of a reissue of a Controlled Vista, with the original CD release only being part of the very limited and expensive Touched by Silence box set. It was time to make the album more widely available. Following the same treatment with the later Mind Maps, the CD features track markers rather than being a single hour-long piece, and the CD and download editions feature 5 previously unheard bonus tracks. The cover has subtle changes, most notably with the oval title removed and replaced with conventional and much smaller text. So small it's almost impossible to read unless you've got the light on or you're in bright daylight, and the addition of XPND to be expanded. The back cover includes a photo of trees and a hill in the same washed out old photo style as the front, with the 5 logos plus Touch logo plus the oval shaped title. The disc uses the SX1 image from the B-side of the 12-inch picture disc. The bonus material is a nice addition, and being mostly beatless brings out a little more atmosphere to the album. With 101 live things going on, not to mention other FSOL releases and re-releases from the past few months, I've not had the chance to reapproach the album with these extra tracks very much, so I can't say whether they change my feelings towards the album massively or not. I'm pretty sure I prefer the new tracks to most of the main album though, interestingly. There's no FSOLDigital Presents on the art or the Bandcamp release, so A Controlled Vista is now officially a Future Sound of London album, despite containing tracks by Yage, Humanoid and Cynthia. A Future Sound of London Going Closer. A brief textural interlude including an almost amusing loop of a scrape and an electronic squelch, some distant tapping and other vaguely percussive noises. It's another one of those pieces that feels like a modern update of the Z-Box sound. Sound of London, Plastic Flower. Quite a dreamy little track this, carrying on with the textures from the previous piece and overlaying them with really gorgeous long synth drones. A slightly wistful tone takes over as the synths become more lo-fi and of nostalgic, hauntological vibes as one thinks of imagined summers of the past, birds chirping and wind gently blowing through the trees, or is that just Brian's synthy? It all merges into one. Yage, Gamelan 19. Given how much gamelan and gamelan-inspired music is on the Electric Brainstorm mixes, it's surprising the sound appears so rarely in FSOL's original music. This is 2 glorious minutes of tinkling bells, plinking metallic notes, some wooden-sounding percussion, all major key and hugely heartwarming. The bird calls from the previous piece continue throughout. I'm using this now as a chance to formally announce my petition for Gamelan 1 to 18 to get official release. Sound of London's Spiral Stairwell. A slightly groovy double bass riff and thudding beat is at the core of this superb head nodder. There are so many layers of percussion here, drum machines, acoustic drum samples and old rhythm machines, shakers, creates a really visceral sound. It's a pretty simple repetitive piece but really fun. The future sound of London, Loaded Fold. Some metallic scraping, or a synthetic equivalent, introduces this piece and it's back to more familiar rhythmic IDM territory, but I'm not completely convinced this is contemporary with the rest of the album. The sound is really quite similar to a number of pieces on Environment 7, without the minimal space of most of Controlled Vista. Huge dark drones and fuzzy noises take over at the end as the beat fades out and things close on a buzz. Touched Music FSOL Night 13, 24th of October 2025. To launch the Controlled Vista reissue, yet another Touch Music night was broadcast via Mixler. I believe 2025 is the first year where more music was released and broadcast via Touch Music than via FSOLDigital. The 30-minute warm-up this time came in the form of 3 distinct tracks: Wells Cathedral, Source of Uncertainty and Viewed from Auroral Hill. I love how all these things, mind maps, trip maps, bonus mixes, transmissions, warm-ups, they all start out reasonably normal promotional things and end up taking on a life of their own. Oh, once again, I'll get to the content of those 3 tracks in a few minutes. The main part of the mix was announced as tonight's main feature, a Controlled Vista, but once again this was an exclusive mix with a big crossover with the release. So how do the two differ? They start the same, but after offers on the table, the mix moves into new territory with some electronic drones, familiar sounding wind chimes played in reverse, a voicemail asking for a track for a Ministry of Sound compilation, and the chance for Just a Fucking Idiot to be used on a TV advert, for some creepy ambience, and then the mix skips forward to Organic Weapon, and then we're into a very odd track, really deep bass, fast clicky hissy beats, believe it's got a working title of It Means Nothing. Then a type of thought fades into Tiny Machine Birth and Mass Made, Controlled Vista, It All Goes to Path, Spiral Stairwell, Loaded Fold and Subtle Chords. This run of tracks is followed by an environment of Dart's synth drones and some familiar field recordings and Gamelan 19, and moving on to other Controlled Vistas, Yages Despite. Then we get something new, slow glitchy beats, melancholic vocal samples and some 90s tour samples over the top. It's only short but lovely. We then nip back over to other Controlled Vistas with Across Lands overlaid with sounds from Dreaming with the TV on, followed by Closure and Optical Overspill from the original, and back to the others with Reacting. With only 2 exclusive tracks and the bulk of the original Controlled Vista intact, it's once again less of an essential show than an intriguing curio that acted as a great way to promote the mix on the night while offering listeners something a little exclusive. The Future Sound of London Unrealities. Release date 24th October 2025. Unrealities, 8 compositions, 2 hours 50 minutes. In the spirit of audio art commissions by radio stations across Europe in the early 1970s, partly because avant-garde composers found it difficult to have their work performed, 8 compositions by the Future Sound of London were created to accompany the Touched Music album launch evenings, 2019 to 2025. The Touch Music FSOL deluge continues. This is the previous 6 Touch Music Mixler Nights 30-minute warm-ups compiled in one place. They're not quite in order. Cloudforms comes before the subconscious mind communicates, despite being broadcast afterwards, but they are sequenced in a way that emphasises development, starting with the most abstract and leading up to the most musical. I knew about this release months in advance and was very excited for it to come along to get these pieces in quality better than rips of a mid-fi stream. Not everyone was quite so happy. There are currently 2 very negative reviews on the album's Bandcamp page, once from someone who apparently only likes 2 FSOL albums, so arguably their most abstract release is not going to appeal, but the other suggests the whole thing is all ambient drone type stuff, which says to me they might not have given the album more than a cursorily skip through, because there is a lot going on here, especially on the later tracks. Mind you, it's not helped by the only preview track being the most conventionally musical. I think something like The Subconscious Mind Communicates, or at least Wells Cathedral, should probably be used as a preview track to give listeners an idea of what the bulk of the album's actually like. It's an album of 2 halves for me. The first half is reasonably inconsequential, mildly diverting, but not something I'm going to return to much. The second half, however, is some of my all-time favourite FSOL material, with some of the most rich and vivid soundscapes ever put out under the name. I love sound collage stuff, and this is very much that. Back to the sound of environments, 3D headspace tour, gigantic globular burst of anti-static. Running to 3 hours, it's not going to get a physical release. A 3 CD box set of the most abstract music the band has put out isn't really an option, but if I was going to do a physical version, I'd say Cloudforms, The Subconscious Mind Communicates, Wells Cathedral and Viewed from a Rural Hill, with a couple of edits to remove a minute or so, would probably make one of my all-time favourite FSOL albums. I know you're listening, Brian, how's about it? The Wasteground. Unrealities is an album that plays the long game, which is a brave move in 2025 when attention spans have been fucked by social media, smartphones, Spotify and other terrible things beginning with S. This piece trusts you'll be listening to the end because it makes no attempt to grab your attention. Admittedly, this is because when it was created it was absolutely intended to just be 30-minute warm-up, an opportunity to play around with sound for half an hour to create something with the original remit of Eno's definition of ambient, not completely background music but not something detailed enough to require close listening. Quite a lot of it is drone, a long, quietly growling bass synth tone that runs throughout almost the entire thing. Over this, various sounds are placed, bursts of noise, occasional spoken elements, synthetic bleeps, electronic voices, radio static, mouths breathing down phones, classic FSOL style, unidentifiable samples. They're all spread out though, sometimes appearing in close proximity, other times occurring minutes apart. As far as exceptionally abstract sound art goes, this is decent. It's clearly not the product of experienced electroacoustic composers, but neither is it entirely pointless. There's enough going on for it to have been successful in its initial purpose of creating an atmosphere and a bit of a buzz to warm the show up. The title is a pretty decent name for something this stark. This was first heard as the warm-up for the 7th Touch Music Night to launch Mind Maps 3. The Desolate Wasteground. so things seem to have got that bit bleaker. Actually saying that, this isn't anywhere near as stark and cold as The Wasteground, originally broadcast as the warm-up for Touch Music Night 8, launching My Maps 4. This is a big step up in content with a very clear attempt to make something a lot more conventionally musical. Again, there's a drone running throughout, although this time it's more traditionally tonal, sweeping up and down through a few notes and having a fairly rich texture. The first sound heard over the top is the human voice, some Eastern sounding, possibly chanted singing, which runs through the bulk of the first half, coming and going and forming the main, well, I won't say hook, but you know what I mean. I remember on the night of broadcast sending Brian a message saying how good this sounded and how I'd love to hear more like it. He responded saying this was an Environment 7.3, and yes, chunks of this form the semi-title track of that album, Where All Is Ending. Birdsong, musical elements, various tracks from the early 90s through to the present, including Quagmire, Future Testaments, some degree of Sanctuary, lots of burbling, synthy noise, windscreen wipers, some electric and bass guitar improvisation. As the piece goes on, it becomes brighter, although dark sounds begin to come in again near the end. The final 5 minutes becomes a little more dense, with some jarring, plucked strings, a few samples from the start of Room 208, rhythmic tuned percussion, and in the final 90 seconds, some fairly intense electronic surges and whooshes. Although the edit on Where All Is Ending is a touch tighter than I would have done, I reckon there's a good 7-minute piece here, it does pick the best and busiest parts of the track. The Exhibition Hall, My Maps 5's warm-up show. This is expanding the sound further into a much more obvious sound collage, built less on a single drone with sounds over the top, and instead shifting from one idea to the next. It opens with some cavernous drones. Boy, what am I going to do when I've finished this series and no longer get to use the word cavernous several times a week? Before nighttime crickets slowly creep their way in. We get someone herding sheep or goats. Is that from Electric Brainstorm 8? I don't know, my brain's fried at this point. Then a lot of field recordings of muttering and talking, background sounds, definitely an urban environment of some kind. Back to the reverbs just before the 10-minute mark, then buzzing and crackling electronics, seabirds, some electronic bleeps, murmured speech. At 16.5 minutes, we get the first properly musical elements of the track, with a deep synth note rising from near silence, some whiffling synthy sounds, a sample used in the unreleased track from the Lifeforms VHS buried deep in there. A dog barks a lot, more seaside sounds appear, then we're back to urban field recordings again, vehicles braking, traffic passing, then a very, very familiar recording of insects and birds, globular, I think. A few bits of Quagmire deep in the back, that keeps turning up, and some strange sound design of warped and muffled noises before drones to end. This really is another one of those cases where you can really hear the Z-Box element rearing its head again. This feels like a high-fidelity, extended version of some of the ideas Brian was exploring in the 80s. Despite the high quantity of field recordings, it's not actually the most atmospheric piece, with a number of different sources giving it a jumbled and scattered feel. Cloud Forms. So this was the 5th warm-up to be broadcast, although it's possible that the album was put together with Mind Maps 3 to 6 at the start, in which case it does follow that chronology. This is the point where things really take off for me. This isn't an interesting study in quiet sound collage, but feels like an intentional composition. I think what is probably a sample of a choir takes the lead, going through various effects and filters, pitching up and down to play a long drawn-out melody over a period of time, electronic sounds, spoken word, water droplets. It's all still somewhat abstract, but picks up with distant church bells leading into a section where the drones become thicker, reminding me somewhat of the darker stretches on the KLF's Chill Out. Some Lifeforms era samples are played on top, and the drone begins to spread out into a gorgeous, shimmering, airy chord, over which we get quiet piano notes and sinister flange synths, and we're really in quite dramatic territory now. This is very much not background music, but really involving and quite heavy-going foreground ambient. Then in come kicks, bass, and big synth arpeggios, and the track really takes off. The cloud forms have changed from occasional little fluffy clouds or overcast skies into something darker, more dramatic, black rain clouds suggesting a storm. It really reminds me of the final part of Luke Ferrari's Presque No. 2. Then beautiful piano improv, tinkling notes raining from the clouds. Eventually things calm down and we're lulled into a false sense of security, expecting a long fade out. Instead, quiet, ominous booms, thunder in the distance, sinister whistling, spacious plucked melodies, and further beautiful piano take us to the end, constantly afloat the endless filtered choral chord. I love this one. It's an absolutely tremendous piece of ambient music, exploring various different shades of its sound, from quiet and wispy to in your face and emotional. Really some of my favourite FSOL of any era. On the night it was broadcast, I described it as my favourite FSOL thing in years. The only criticism that could be made about this track is it could be chopped down. You could take the most striking bit of it and come up with a stunning 6 or 7 minute ambient piece. But then if that was the case, it probably would never have been made in the first place, as this was initialised to be a 30-minute warm-up. But I'm not complaining. Subconscious mind communicates. Okay, so that last track's a tough act to follow. Subconscious mind communicates doesn't try to compete, instead returning to the sound collage approach again, only this time with more focus. Suburban birdsong opens, then more cavernous drones. I got another one in. Some odd samples, and we're into musical territory again with some sad, sentimental sounding strings. After a period of abstract, murky sound design, things begin to head into structure with a mix of reversed and time-stretched electronics, and then some friendly, shimmering synth pads. These elements come and go, each time bringing about different atmospheres, but sticking with it for several minutes at a time, with drones and samples, field recordings and synths coalescing into environments of their own before fading away. Footsteps echo, someone dials an old-fashioned phone, sinister reverberated piano comes over. It's a strange piece. It feels like it really should have come before Cloudforms, as it's clearly the development between the exhibition hall and that. But some great atmospherics here. Wells Cathedral. And this one feels like a development of Cloudforms. Instead of a choral drone, this has organ recorded at Wells Cathedral, hence the title, as the background. Again, it's electronically treated and used to create a stunning blanket of sound for the rest of the track to snuggle under. Actually, that metaphor doesn't quite work if you extend it that far, does it? Frankly, I could happily listen to the muffled organ and field recordings for 15 minutes, but FSOL is rarely that minimal, so we begin to get synths and electronic elements. As the organ fades away, we get a voicemail, some wind sounds, and then things really get building with a fast, clattering IDM beat that keeps coming and going in and out of the mix. Once again, I'm reminded of Luke Ferrari, the third Presque Rien avec Filet, this time the one that actually featured on Electric Brainstorms 2. This whole section has a very wonky, lo-fi, tape-saturated feel, as if the whole thing is pushing the limits of the tape. The flute comes in, the beat becomes slightly more extended in its following appearances, and things suddenly go underwater before we fade out on tense synth chords. Spellbinding stuff. Source of Uncertainty. This is ostensibly an alternate take of the Environment 5 track, and it was originally called the EMS version, but the piano in it is either a totally different take or part of the much longer piece that was never previously used, as it doesn't share any obvious melodic elements with either previously released version of the track. Frankly, this should be an EMS piano track, as it begins with thick layers of fuzzy synthy drones, seriously suffocatingly thick, which build to a crescendo, finally abating to let in Daniel Pemberton's piano in the final couple of minutes. Gorgeous stuff. Viewed from a rural hill. Pemberton piano followed by new Views track. Is this 2010 again? This actually takes the Views series in a different direction. While occasional tracks have been string based rather than piano, they'd always been very stripped back. This opens with more huge synth sounds, building up with Philip Glass style ostinatos, 4-string samples or possibly very realistic synth strings come in. Is that even brass there? And it's all just huge, life-affirmingly beautiful stuff. Reverse piano comes in and then a classical guitar loop plays over the fade out. A stunning way to finish what, while starting very cold and unknowable and abstract and difficult to listen to, ends up being an album that features an enormous chunk of my favourite FSOL material. Cloudforms, Wells Cathedral and Viewed from a Rural Hill are among the best things to come out under the name and have made me more excited about the future of FSOL than I have been in a very long time. FSOLDigital presents Mind Trip Christmas 01. Release date 21st December 2025. So yes, 2025 was the year of touched music and FSOL, with technically 5 physical releases, 6 if you count the different vinyl and CD versions of Mind Map 6. One might say this is unprecedented. This mix was mentioned in a few places online, first officially announced on an early unrelated touched Mixler night, sort of discussed on and off in a what's it going to be sort of way in the weeks before any official statement was made. Up until the week of release, there were still tentative plans for the CD version to be a promo-only exclusive of the night's mix, but then late on it was decided to make it a full retail release. I fully approve. The title Mind Trip suggests a mix of mind maps and trip maps, which is not entirely true of the style. It's much closer to mind maps than anything, but even then it doesn't feel quite the same, with a third of the tracks being FSOLDigital originals and a generally more ambient vibe overall. Many of the tracks have quite a dreamy feel, making it sleepier and more atmospheric than the more hectic rhythm-heavy mind maps, although that's not to say it's all in that direction, with some heavy tracks also appearing. Still, with tempos averaging lower than normal, it's the least IDM-oriented of these electronic touched music releases. None of the tracks are listed as remixes in the sleeve, much like trip maps, with a credit to Yage for remixing and rehydrating the whole disc instead. No usual fonts at all, with a fairly generic looking one used throughout the digipack. Is that Impact? As with all the other remix discs on Touched, this is CD only, with no download option. I'm very fond of this one, with a diverse range of sounds, more emphasis on atmosphere, textures and gentler rhythms. It's definitely a bit more up my street than a lot of the Mind Map CDs. It's also quite a few minutes shorter. DF Tram, Early Deep Hearted Yage Remix. The CD opens with Pete Tong's Essential Mix intro from December 93, which is a fun touch before heading into this gorgeous track. It's an epic at nearly 9 minutes and builds up slowly and gradually from warm gentle synth pads to whooshes and sweeps into a euphoric arpeggio, always overlaid with sounds and samples adding rich texture. It never bursts into a climax, instead steadily playing and creating a gorgeous emotive atmosphere. It closes on the beautiful Object spoken sample first heard on Electric Brainstorm's 12. AIMB, Anthophilite Yage Remix. Siren Chugging, this gorgeous track is based around a wistful 2-chord sequence, woozy synth sounds, gentle, slightly jazzy beats and wordless vocal samples. This is an absolutely beautiful piece, so I really need to check out the original too, as I could easily listen to a lot more of this. The field recording at the end could be a beach, a park or a playground, somewhere where families are enjoying themselves. Then a voicemail from Amy at Caroline Records to close. Caroline, didn't they own Hypnotic? In which case that might not be a brilliant phone call. Tim Koch, Bloom, Yage Remix. Possibly representing the trip map side of the album. This remix has a gentle krautrock feel with quite thin, shrill sounding acoustic drums, layers of guitar arpeggios and lots of synths. It's actually a track that could easily fit on either a Mind Maps or Trip Maps album, giving an idea of how much crossover there is in various FSOLDigital projects away from the extremes of each style. Reverse voices add texture, layering up to provide a subtly emotive climax. It's got a bouncy down-tempo groove to it. Some familiar bells, they're on an environment of some sort, but my brain doesn't work at this point. And a voicemail crossfade into the next track. Sundial Aeon, The Dawn, Yage remix. The billionth Sundial Aeon remix of the 2020s, and another corker. This opens with 90 seconds of layers of thick synth pads blending seamlessly from the previous track before we get the 303 line that brings us into more typical Sundial Aeon territory. This is a much brighter track than earlier remixes, major key for once, and the Yage production once again brings comparisons with carbon-based lifeforms that group themselves with an FSOL influence and an acid Sybient sound. It continues the broadly uplifting and atmospheric feel of the CD. Apertures, People Made of Smoke, listed in the cover as Enofa, People Made of Smoke. So this was slightly irritating. Material I'd sent to Brian to work on as part of our Apertures project. He'd completed this track, but it had somehow ended up in the remix folder instead of the collaborations folder, so he included it as a Yage remix of Enofa. But there's no Enofa track called People Made of Smoke, it's just a bunch of stems for a half-finished piece I sent to Brian. So yeah, this is officially Apertures, just mislabeled. Anyway, my original ideas were built around an A-B structure, the A section being maybe slightly orb-ish, 4 to the floor with percussive loops and organ samples, before heading into a B section of dub techno pads, breakbeats and distorted 303. Brian cut out just about everything from the A section entirely and increased the speed by quite a lot, leading to this weird mix of pitch black dub techno, jungle and acid. Flutes, mangled voice samples and echoey synth chords are thrown over the top in a chaotic manner. Up until this point the Apertures record was sounding pretty ambient. This has changed things a bit. Flutes and voicemails to end. Murya Vatnajökull, who knows? Yage remix. Definite Mind Maps vibes on this piece with smooth, warm synth and punchy IDM beats. More on the mid-tempo side of the sound, but with some complex beatwork nevertheless. It's maybe a touch less distinctive than the bulk of the discs so far, but keeps the general uplifting vibe of the mix going. Info, Roth, Yage remix. The hi-hat line and dark analog chords opening here bring to mind 90s ambient techno. As clattering breaks and ominous stabbing melodies come in, however, it heads into much darker territory, becoming the most jarring and confrontational sounding piece on the disc. Tractor, Drift, Yage remix. The gossamer fine ambient dub sounds of Dub Tractor are given a subtle overhaul by Yage on this lovely track, with quiet glitches as beats and shimmering bit-crushed synths reminiscent of Life in Moments track Plant Life. It ends on a voicemail from someone called Steve, who says a lot. I suspect that word's been chopped up and pitch shifted intentionally. QLD. Humanoid tracks on these mixes tend to be along the more conventional acid-ish end of things, but this is different, with booming muffled kicks, a super fast breakbeat rattling away in the background, heavily compressed ominous synth pads and gurgles, and a lot of other squelching and burbling sounds over the top. There are some comparisons with the Cage EP, but overall it's really hard to compare with any other piece. Math Matrix Square Yage remix. The final remix of the album is a bit of a surprise, almost opening like a synthwave piece with throbbing analog synths and straightforward 4-to-the-floor beats. In the middle it diverts into a more atmospheric section with subtler synth pads, but overall this is a bit of an in-your-face, upbeat banger of a track, completely at odds with the rest of the CD. A strange one, but a lot of fun. Sound of London Recorders. Back to ambience for the first of 2 FSOL tracks to close the disc. Long haunting drones and what sounds like, well, recorders over the top. Not an instrument regularly used in ambient music, but hey, why not? The future sound of London, back at the Windfell. More ambient here, opening with vibraphone, I think, or maybe electric piano. Anyway, lots of nice jazzy notes with darker drones in the background. Piano quickly takes over with harp over the top. It's all very melancholic, then violin, flute, saxophone. Between the 2 tracks closing this disc and the final pieces on Unrealities, it seems like the acoustic, modern, classical, even jazz-oriented sides of FSOL are back on the table after being largely absent for many years now. A really beautiful piece and a lovely way to end the disc. Music FSOL Night 14, 21st December 2025. The Mindstrip CD was launched with the usual Mixler broadcast. We open with a 30-minute warm-up, the first since the release of Unrealities, suggesting we might well get an Unrealities 2. Well, what's an FSOLDigital era release without a sequel? I shan't go into tons of detail about this as I'd like to cover it when it gets a proper release, but this continues in the vein of the year's previous warm-ups, much more musical than the abstract sound collages of the earlier shows. Elements of some of the Bugbeat sessions turns up, including bits of Morning Mists of Obscurity and I Felt, the latter itself being an alternate version of Environment 6.5's Strange Allure. This fragile, glitchy ambient sound is very much the theme throughout the warm-up. The version of Mindtrip broadcast ran to over an hour and a half, the first 53 minutes shared with the CD, the remaining 38 minutes exclusive to the transmission itself. After an announcement that the CD was available for sale, the mix continued with the remix of Inky Pack's Climbing from My Maps 4. After the usual answer phone messages, it heads into an unreleased piece, Pemberton Sitar Evening by Yage, a dark Trip Maps-esque dubby psychedelic piece with sitar recorded by Daniel Pemberton. I was recently informed he doesn't like being called Dan, so many apologies for the 7,112 times I've called you Dan in this series to date, Daniel. Then it's Autechre time with a Yage remix of a guest-on track. It's very Autechre-ish, although clearly made just using some samples cut from the original piece. Unlikely it'll ever get a proper release, which is a shame as it's a pairing of two of my favourite electronic artists. Then it's straight into another Hyojin piece. As always, it falls into the category of not quite my kind of thing stylistically, but impossible to deny how stunning Hyojin's tunes are. Then there was a mid-tempo track with acoustic drums and swirly synths that people in the chat seem to recognise, but I'm none the wiser. Some very quiet spoken word leads into an 808 State track, remix maybe, collaboration. It's what you'd expect from the pairing, some top drawer acid. After Carlson Flum's ISO 66 Yage remix from My Maps 4, come two further exclusive Yage remixes of tracks by Headset and Minilan, the former some funky down-tempo, the latter a melancholic IDM piece. And with that, the mix and the year comes to an abrupt end. And that, as they say, is that. We have now reached the end of 2025, and at the time of recording, the only things to come out since then are the Sleepwalking 7-inch and a digital reissue of Papua New Guinea 2001. There's not enough there to make another video, and besides I'd really like to give stuff a chance to sink in a little better before dissecting it. That's not quite everything though, as there are a number of odds and ends, things I've missed, loose ends, interesting discussion points and so on, which I'll be looking at next week. In the meantime, do drop me a comment down below or hit the like button, the algorithm seems to like it when you do that, or subscribe so you can join me next time for what will be the final episode for now. Sometimes that car just take a minute to restart my brain. Over this, various sounds are placed, bursts of noise, occasional spoken elements, occasional spoken hum. I might give up now and go to bed.